Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. I'm so delighted to see you and glad that you came. Now, since its inception in 2008, Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week has been a big tent, welcoming institutions and people and issues to do with climate and sustainability from all sectors of the human community and society. Launched by Masdar at the time, ADSW has always recognized that the interconnected problems of global warming and the need to meet global energy needs affect all people, and therefore solving them requires the engagement of all people and all human enterprises they represent. Now, the sweep of human achievement doesn't stop at business, energy, and technology, but includes the arts and culture. And as the head of a major arts organization, as I'm privileged to be, the Guggenheim Constellation of Museums, I am very grateful to speak here on this important platform about the question of how art museums can do their part to shape a livable planet for all. Now, to orient you briefly with this slide, even if you have never been to the Guggenheim in New York, you probably recognize there at the right our foundational museum built by Frank Lloyd Wright, this spiraling building, an organic sculpture really, across from Central Park on Fifth Avenue, like some rising snail shell. Okay, that's for by way of introduction. Now, you probably are all familiar with this incident 2 years ago when climate activists threw soup at the vitrine that normally protects Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. It was perhaps the most spectacular version of a kind of attack that had already become a frequent occurrence since 2022, when a man had thrown a piece of cake at this very same case. By my best count today, there have been more than 40 such interventions, shall we say, with famous paintings. Most of these attacks resulted in no damage or very little damage because the pictures were behind glass. But these attacks have certainly disturbed the experiences of museum visits for thousands of visitors and caused plenty of nuisances for the museums who have to close the museum for a while, institute new practices, assess the damage, if any, and so forth. Now, for most people like ourselves, the immediate reaction to something like that is one of shock. Who on earth does such a thing? Because after all, what would the world be like without such priceless, invaluable art like this, if we let this stuff go on? Now, as a director of a museum organization, I take my responsibility for our collections very seriously, and so I support reasonable efforts to hold perpetrators accountable by due legal process, and that more or less goes on around the world when these things happen. Nevertheless, I'm almost more interested in understanding why anyone would want to risk their personal freedom by disturbing art that their fellow human beings are eager to see. Why do that? Studying the phenomenon, however, I realized that the mostly young people who are doing these things are, asking that question. So I asked the question, who does such a thing and what is a world without art? And actually, studying the phenomenon, I realized that the mostly very young people of the next generation who are doing these things are flipping that question, what is a world without art, to questions that interest them. And these questions are things like, why spend billions on preserving art when there is going to be no livable world left if we don't act? Or a question like, why do museums even matter when there will be no humans to run or to enjoy them? And studying this, I could see that quite a few activists in museums don't actually attack the art directly. In many cases, as you can see here, they unfurl banners, they protest in other ways. It's still disturbing, but they don't attack the art. They make the point, as they do here so powerfully in our very own Guggenheim Museum in New York, that there will be no art on a dead planet. The attackers and these protesters are often characterized as mindless barbarians who don't understand the value of art's contribution to humanity. But digging deeper, I have concluded that these attacks have a logic, even if we don't like them. And that logic actually comes from the attackers' keen understanding of the value of art. They understand it almost better than anybody else, you could say. It is no accident that thus far these attackers have not actually destroyed the works. Some have been attacked pretty badly with some damage, but they haven't destroyed them. That is not their goal. These attackers throw fairly benign liquids like soup at paintings that are usually behind glass, and they know that. Or they attach themselves to frames, not the works themselves, with dissolvable glue. It's all a total nuisance, and none of this is great. But I think it's worth hearing from them why they do it. Here are two examples of statements you can see there. A leader of the organization Extinction Rebellion in New York that does these things puts it this way. The function of art is for people to be able to understand the world that they live in and to reflect on the human condition. And that is the reason for us to be in museums, to tell people that we are in the middle of an emergency and it is the time now for you to face that emergency. And another says it very briefly. The president of the Center for Cultural Power notes that protest is like theater. It's the creation of a counter-narrative. In other words, it's art. And the video of the soup throwing at the Mona Lisa, or as you see in this picture here, this staging of a similar soup attack on Van Gogh's sunflowers at the National Gallery in London, these demonstrate that performativity. Look at them, they're all ready for it. They're well rehearsed, and these incidents are often recorded in excellent video and photography by camera wizards and artists brought in by the activists. You see them sitting right there. Those are not random journalists called in just in time. Okay, so if these activists understand the value of art and performance, why do they target art museums and not other institutions that are much more powerful than museums? I think the logic goes like this. Art is important and it draws attention, especially if it was made by a world-famous male European painter. Most of the attacks are on such works. And in an important international art museum like the Louvre or the National Gallery or the Guggenheim. But more importantly, climate activists argue that museums are at fault in the climate crisis in two specific ways. By accepting major gifts from donors that are involved or who are involved in the fossil fuel industry, and second, by doing too little to make their own museums sustainable. I have views of the donor question, but for this summit I'm going to set it aside because I think the climate impact of museum operations is more interesting for this whole gathering and the Sustainability Week that's focused on solutions. The climate activists know that world-class art museums, like the ones I'm involved in, are very energy intensive. And they are so for a host of reasons that I can show you here. First of all, they require stringent air conditioning to keep temperature and humidity within a very narrow, internationally acceptable range. It may be too narrow. They need bespoke lighting systems to show art off to best and most safest advantage. They are tied deeply into international air travel as they draw masses and masses of tourists and also ship art around the world in very complicated, expensive ways. Their exhibitions involve shipping and installation that is highly complex and requires more travel and more energy and materials that are not easily reused or upcycled with some compromises. All of that is true. And I would say that art museums and all museums really have been mostly slow to adjust their practices to a rapidly warming world. Climate activists are calling on us, museum leaders, museum staff, museum donors, to do better and act faster. Although I want these attacks on art to stop, I do not want us to ignore the messages that these activists are sending. And I'm happy to say that at the Guggenheim, which I joined just almost 2 years ago, they had already decided, we had decided to run to the noise, not away from it, and commit to comprehensive climate assessment and planning and implementation of policies and changes to our buildings that are future forward, and geared to reducing our carbon footprint and waste. As you can see in this picture, you see our little museum there in the middle, right? Our New York museum can be like a thriving flower pot, spreading green shoots and practices all over the city and beyond by example and collaboration. So with that commitment, what have we found over the past 3 years? And what have museums, including ours, actually started to do? I think this is a combination of things. We're working on all of it, and many museums are. We are very organized about it. We can reduce the energy draw through conversion of lighting to LED, by adopting smart building systems technology, and developing more reasonable, wider standards for temperature and humidity control that is still safe for the art and for people. We can measure direct and indirect climate impact, and we do so for our loan exhibitions. We can reimagine all this complex exhibition logistics. We can build crates to be reusable, and packaging materials can be upcycled. We can rationalize our complicated touring schedules, consolidate freight, consolidate and reduce air travel of people. And in a more visionary way, we can use our museum programs, our public programs that are so educational, as sites of experimentation, engaging artists and youth. We seek and we develop partnerships for programming, but also for policy development. We want to partner with you, all of you and your businesses. We can seek better partnerships for procurement, upstream and downstream, aligned with sustainability values. And eventually, we intend to develop a comprehensive climate action plan tied to measurable KPIs. But the very first thing that you see there, tell any museum or gallery owner you know, the first thing we did is the thing that every art organization, not-for-profit or commercial, should do, and that is to join the Gallery Climate Coalition. It's easy to remember. It's the other DCC, the Gallery Climate Coalition. And it is a global organization that's been added for 5 years now, of almost 1,000 members who commit to achieving zero waste and a carbon footprint reduction of at least 50% and probably more by 2030 from the time they join. Now, a little bit more on the Guggenheim. We are so lucky because we don't operate only the museum in New York. We actually own also a museum in Venice, the Peggy Guggenheim Collection, and we have very long-term partnerships already with the Guggenheim in Bilbao. That is a museum we cooperate, and soon, of course, we will do the same in Abu Dhabi, opening next winter. Now, and here they all are. You see them here. You can see what they are, these four, in these different cities. And this uniquely international constellation of museums on 3 continents, there is no other museum organization like it, gives us a great opportunity to scale solutions and to lead for climate research and practice in museums. Because look at it. If you think about it, our 4 cities are all in low-lying maritime towns. They face common threats of rising sea level, flooding, excessive heat, and rising energy costs in different markets and different environments. So we can compare and study the long-term implications of these environments for our art, our buildings, our conservation practices, and our climate control systems. And we can work across this beautiful constellation of ours to set collective standards that can become a model for different countries and maybe the world of art, and develop risk mitigation procedures together. So our learnings are local, but our impact is global, as our solutions may become global case studies for institutions in different climates, how museums can deal with it. Here's one quick example. Here's one quick example. The Guggenheim, it doesn't want to stay with me. There we are. The Guggenheim in Bilbao has the most comprehensive of our climate plan. It doesn't want to stay, okay. Of our climate plan museums, no worries about it. And that is the Guggenheim Bilbao. And it is not so surprising because it is our newest museum. And when it comes to reducing carbon emissions, new buildings are your friend, just as our building here will be. The most important data points on this slide are at the very top and the bottom. First, the museum in Bilbao developed a formal sustainability action plan aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, That means they have specific targets that can be measured. And as we all know, what gets measured gets done. So that's important. We can't just talk, we have to do and measure. And so at the very bottom, you see the measured result of 5 years of sustained climate action work in Bilbao. In 2024, the museum's carbon footprint was down 17% over 2023 in 1 year, and 31% over 2019. Last, a final advantage for the Guggenheim on climate, and I want to stress this for you, is our relationship to artists. The Guggenheim was founded in 1937 to collect, to exhibit, and to promote the art of the present, so that it may be a resource for many, many, many tomorrows to come. That's what those climate activists are talking about, after all. To this day, we are a museum or set of museums of the art of today, and many artists of our time are eager to translate ecological urgency, our crisis, into works that have wide public reach. We are public institutions in the end, and we and other museums like Tate Modern have found that museums and artists can be powerful allies to break climate silence and especially apathy, to give hope that another tomorrow is possible if we pull together. So in this example, in 2022, we completed our first full carbon study of an exhibition by Cecilia Vicuña, which was then the most comprehensive study of its kind in the Americas and is being copied by others. We shared our learnings widely and immediately improved our practices. We even offset some of our climate costs for that exhibition with support for land conservation and reforestation efforts in Chile, Vicuña's home country. The artist was a fantastic partner throughout. And here at right, or really the whole thing, these two images from inside and outside the Guggenheim in New York, you can see the record of a performance that she conducted with visitors, a living quipu, as she called it. A quipu is an ancient South American memory technique that records various data in often very long, differently colored strings, like the ones she suspended in the Guggenheim Rotunda. And with these enormous strings, you see she took these knotted strings. She took an audience from the Guggenheim there that day, from the Rotunda floor onto the streets of Manhattan. They processed through it and traveled by boat down the East River a few blocks away in what became a collective healing ceremony, connecting ancient memories of the island of Manhattan with the contemporary city. I think that visitors experience this, because I've looked at all the detail of what we found out. They experienced it as an utterly memorable call to action on land and nature preservation. It was a performance that will have surprised them just as much as a soup thrower would have. But I like to believe that it will have stayed with them as positive motivation. So this is what I think it means to engage with the challenge that climate activists have brought home to us in our museums. Thank you very much.